start? Yeah? Okay. Okay, then let's start. Warm welcome to this first Boell Talk. The Heinrich Boell Foundation is organizing, the Heinrich Boell Foundation in South Caucasus is organizing today. We want to establish a new format, a public format where we want to discuss relevant topics for Georgia, here in Georgia. We want to popularize also green topics as a green political foundation. And I think most of the green topics are relevant topics for Georgia. We start with a foreign policy discussion today. I think you all know that, or most of you know that we have an advisory of the Eastern Partnership, EU's neighborhood policy towards the Eastern neighbors, 10 years. And the foundation just recently has published 3 articles from each country of the region, and 1 article, more strategic article, discussing where are we and what comes next with the Eastern Partnership. We have today here, I think, 3 very interesting speakers discussing Eastern Partnership, Georgia's role, but also what could be a common vision for the EU and Georgia in the context of the Eastern Partnership. It's always this discussion about what comes next after association agreement and DCFTA for Georgia. I think Georgia is quite far in its rapprochement with the EU, but as we also all know, there's no membership perspective. So I think there is maybe the question what comes next, but there's still a lot of to do also for Georgia in terms of the reform process and in terms of implementing association agreement and deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. I would like to welcome today to my left, here from Tbilisi, Sophie Katsarava, Chairperson of the Committee on Foreign Affairs in the Georgian Parliament, from the Georgian Dream Party. You have a strong background on foreign policy, foreign and security policy. So I think that's very useful also for this discussion about what expectations do we have here in Georgia from the EU and ahead of going further. Then our guest here from Germany, from Berlin, to my right, Manuel Sarrazin, member of the German Parliament of the Green Party. He's for 2 days here in Tbilisi, also meeting NGOs and officials, and will tomorrow evening going further even to Armenia. So it's also a little regional trip for him. He's dealing with all Eastern countries, he's normally saying, so very much with Eastern Partnership countries, but also with Poland, Central Eastern European countries, Balkans. So he has a pretty good track record on what's going on in the region, and a pretty good overview. And Kornely Kakachia, director of the Georgian Institute of Politics. Normally I don't need to introduce you. You are nearly every evening on the panel. But Kornely is also a friend. We published together a book on geopolitics and EU policy in the region last year. And I think he's, for me here in Georgia, the one person who really understands what is a think tank. And what is also developing a strategy for politics and advising politicians on this. So thank you also for having you here. Also as a person working a lot of in German Georgian projects. Yeah, you recently published also something on German-Georgian relations. You will find our publications in the back on Eastern Partnership if you are interested. I just wanted to promote this. And I will give everybody here like 7-8 minutes for short input and want to ask you, Sophia, first, so what are the key challenges for Georgia at the moment? What Georgia needs to do to go further, but also what do you expect from the EU? So where do you see deficits in the Eastern Partnership, also supporting the reform process in Georgia?
Thank you very much in the first place for inviting me to this panel. I welcome your initiative to host new formats, as you said, new public formats to generate debates on topical issues. I'm also very much encouraged to see the full room, especially consisting of young students. This is extremely encouraging to see such an interest in this topic, and I'm sure that it will continue in the same way on further topics. I was literally last week, I was attending exactly the same panel actually on Eastern Partnership as a speaker in Warsaw at the Warsaw Security Summit. The reason I'm mentioning that is that I appreciate the fact that our partners in different formats here in Tbilisi or elsewhere in different countries using highest platforms dedicate attention and pay attention to this issue, because it is indeed worth paying an attention in this particular case to Eastern Partnership. I think looking back, very brief background, I'm sure everybody in this room knows about that. If we look back on Eastern Partnership and 10 years anniversary that we are marking this year, we can now say with full confidence that it was a progressive and forward-looking format, and I think Georgia, of all Eastern Partnership countries, benefited a lot. To list only a few, and well, actually, and those are the milestones so far yet. Association agreement, DCFTA, as you rightly mentioned, and visa liberalization are those big milestones when it comes to our integration to the European Union, and there is a lot indeed to be done in future as well to further integrate with the European Union. We can go in further details about what this means and the reforms, and Georgia is going through quite an intensive process of the reforms right now as part of the association agreement, and in general it is important for the country to consolidate democracy, to improve economy, etc., etc. Ultimately, of course, to become a member of the European Union and NATO when that moment comes, but in its own right it is important that Georgia goes through these reforms. Challenges are there, of course. No one is saying that everything is ideal, everything is perfect, but again, looking back, we can see a lot of progress in many areas. I think I keep mentioning this in every format. I have the opportunity to discuss Eastern Partnership. What we need, what we would expect from our partners, despite the challenges that everybody knows about, is more visionary approach to Eastern Partnership. We talk a lot about practical integration. We talk a lot about sectoral integration, and they are extremely important anyway, but I think when it comes, and that's why Eastern Partnership was founded, there is a need to have some kind of a policy, visionary approach to Eastern Partnership, what's next after 2020. When I talk about practical integration, that also includes all the instruments that I mentioned. It includes, it implies the association agreement and the implementation of the association agreement, DCFTA. But again, being realistically optimistic and considering the challenges, I would still, our expectation would be from the European Union to continue that visionary approach. I think also one of the benefits which is worth mentioning, why Eastern Partnership was beneficial, not just for Georgia, but generally beneficial for Eastern Partnership countries. The format itself, I think, increased the visibility amongst the rest of Europe that here is Eastern Partnership and here are individual countries with perhaps different foreign policy aspirations, but Eastern Partnership as such became more visible to the European Union, and I think that's that was a big achievement in addition to everything else. As I said, Georgia was one of those countries which benefited most and we continue in the same way, equally committed to our future aspirations, but we need to be in line with our international partners, with the European Union, and we want to consolidate the European Union towards more visionary approach to Eastern Partnership as a whole, and perhaps differentiated approach towards countries which are part of this format.
Already working. Thank you very much. I just want to add a question. I think for Georgia, this European integration was always, or is always linked, or was always linked with transatlantic integration. And there's a strong track record also in the relations with the US. So what does this difficulties in the transatlantic relations mean for Georgia at the moment? Yeah, I think this is, because this is really a major issue. If you see, it's also for the European Union a major issue, the changes in the US, but especially for a country which is thinking European integration and transatlantic or NATO integration together very much. What does this split, or what does this crisis in the transatlantic relations mean?
Good question. Speaking from the Georgian perspective again, and I think one of the biggest challenges that I was thinking to dedicate more time to that, but I will mention here as well. It is occupation, and it's the security challenge that we are facing, and the territories occupied by Russia. That's a security challenge that we face on a daily basis, and to a certain extent, and not to a certain, but to a big extent, when it comes to our European integration and NATO integration. There are attempts to undermine the aspiration that we are very much committed, but that's a separate story of how becoming more and more resilient as a society, as a country, to withstand those challenges. Well, the whole point of Euro-Atlantic security, European integration and NATO integration, the open door policy, has been the cornerstone of NATO, and NATO remains committed to Georgia's to open door policy when it comes to Georgia. Challenges are out there, of course, but for Georgia, it is not a secret if I say that when it comes to NATO cooperation, Georgia practically is ready, as it is also recognized and admitted by our partners from NATO countries, individually and as an organization, and the more political moment should come when the decision will be made about Georgia's NATO integration. In the meantime, these challenges we do see on a daily basis, the dynamic, how the developments that are going through. But at the same time, this is the moment for Georgia. Every time we are trying to turn challenges into opportunities, which is quite a difficult task, I should say, but I think we are managing that. Turning these challenges into opportunities means that we are using this, even the time span and the period, which is quite a challenging period for European Union as well, and NATO, to use this momentum for Georgia's reforms. And when the moment comes, whenever that moment comes, and we are trying not to specify the date, and not to talk about the dates, because expectations are also very important in our communication, but we have a very clear vision. We know what we want to achieve, and we know how we want to use this period for the benefit of the country. But everything that we do, this is in line with our partners, whether it is the EU or whether it is NATO.
And just maybe a final question. You talk about a vision of the EU. The EU should be more visionary. So is it just membership perspective, or what do you mean with visionary?
The expectation is membership perspective. That's. But visionary means. I mean, it started 10 years ago. We saw a lot of benefit out of these 10 years. Again, talking on behalf of Georgia. And membership perspective is, of course, a great milestone. But visionary means that when we talk about next steps, what we want to see after 10 years, it's about increasing even further the visibility of Eastern Partnership or individual countries who aspire, truly aspire to become members of these organizations.
Okay. Thank you. Manuel, we talked about visions. I would rather ask about ambitions. So my impression is that the EU's ambitions on the Eastern Partnership are rather decreasing than increasing at the moment. How do you see this? So what is possible at the moment in the EU, and how we can prevent growing frustration in those countries who have an interest of in integration into the EU, like for instance Georgia?
So thank you. Actually, I was talking with Robert, the advisor in our fraction before, how pessimistic should I be or not? And he was encouraging me for not being so pessimistic. But on the other way, I also want to be honest. So let's make it that way. I think that the European Union is getting less and less ambition in the region. I think that the European Union is also getting less and less ambition in already candidate and enlargement countries. And this is overall a really dangerous and sorrowing development. I see that the I think that the political standpoint of Berlin is quite important for this. And let's say it that way. I think that our current societies, there could be more and more also certain focus on Eastern Partnership countries and also the 3 DCFTA countries in special. So this general approach to not diversify, to not make too much tailor-made approach towards the single countries in Eastern Partnership, I think this could be changed in Berlin politics. And for example, I think that we could have in the new government a special focus on an envoy for civil society cooperation, not anymore for the whole CIS region, but to have a split and to say the Eastern Partnership countries are under especially seen, and we want to have one person with staff who is organizing that. Today we have the situation that the money which is given by the German government for civil society cooperation Eastern Partnership, at least the government says it's not spent because there are not enough amendments to take it, and I think this can be changed also by more professional setup from us. Yeah. But to come back to the pessimistic view, today we see that Eastern Partnership is lacking of two main pillars. The one is the vision, and I can assure you that there's one party in Germany having in its program membership perspective for Eastern Partnership. This is the Greens. So this is perhaps not the reason why we have so good polling in the moment, but at least it's not preventing us from being good in polls. So obviously, you know, some people are afraid in being ambitioned in the region because they say at home nobody likes. Whether nobody cares or the people don't mind, for sure it's not such a problem. Second point is that you need to have a clear perspective, a kind of vision, especially in post-Soviet countries, because societies in this region are used to have a kind of final aim as a kind of political sentiment. And I think that the European Union is making a big mistake in not being brave enough of saying this. I don't think that we will be able to change that in the European Council in the next 5 years. But of course, having a bit more a positive narrative in Berlin on this could already help a bit in encouraging, also knowing and being honest to Georgians that this might not change the view in Paris or other capitals. Second point is that, of course, Eastern Partnership has been seen in 2014 latest that it's mainly a soft power instrument, and tough power, hard power, security dimension is important, but in the current debate on the reform of Eastern Partnership, there are special outspoken countries who say we don't want to have geostrategics and security elements in the Eastern Partnership, and this is Paris and Berlin. And this is, of course, a problem. And in Georgia, you should be really aware of that the sentiment is growing. And you must make good lobby work, especially to Paris and also to Berlin with us together, to have the perspective from the South Caucasus more in mind when we talk about this. Third point is that, of course, a membership perspective is great in this region, but if we look to the other region where the membership perspective is executed more fiercely to the candidate countries in the Western Balkans, we see currently that we have a problem of ambition also there. And when we see the problems in opening accession talks with North Macedonia and Albania, because some important member states say it is too difficult to bring it through the national public at home, it might be also that the membership perspective will be less credible within the next 5 or 10 years, because our accession process in the Western Balkans also will run into problems, and the credibility there will be also undermined because of a lack of political ambition, or also, let's say, internal problems in European capitals with homemade problems and less outlook in the region. To what this brings me, to not be pessimistic, I think the Georgian society and the Georgian politicians must be aware of that. Don't trust too much on the European Union in that sense. In this moment, you have to, like you said, make your own homework. And you have to be so good that the argument of enlargement policy, and I say enlargement policy now, is becoming a new argument because of front runners like Georgia, hopefully, or like North Macedonia in the moment, have to be valued in their reforms. And that we see a commitment to open society, to rule of law-based democracy, and to all these European values where European Union stands for. And I think that, staying committed to the aim and showing that you are delivering what we want, that this is the right path also for making good lobby work in changing this attitude perhaps of European Union, not perhaps tomorrow, but in a credible time frame. And for this, of course, it is really important also to talk about the region, but it's also important to talk about the specificities of each country, and Georgia has some really special situation in some parts being frontrunner, but also to be aware of that a polarization of the political sphere, a clash inside the society between radical positions, this classical Leninistic game, of how to make a revolution by splitting the movement, founding a more radical one and letting the more radical one overtake the more moderate one. This is what Lenin said, how to organize a revolution. That this is a really dangerous way all over the world and all societies, which is in the end not helping the aim of being stable and also not having a path. And frankly speaking, I think that countries like Georgia need the common, unharmonious vision to go to European Union, also of having something like a common umbrella all politicians agree on. You know what I mean? There is a power of this common vision. We are going to Europe together. And I think this is why also, even if European Union is perhaps today not ambitious enough to give this vision outspoken, it is important that you stay committed to this vision. And of course, you also recognize that you have some partners who are committed to that. And if you look into the history of enlargement, in 1992, by the way, when the big Copenhagen promise was given, Germany was strongly against it, by the way. You forget this usually. Germany was against it. Germany is today much more pro-enlargement than it was in 1992. And since 2004, you have some lobbyists in the European Union who are strongly in favor of more perspective and more geostrategic elements in Eastern Partnership, which is good. And this is not only the Greens, it is also other member states. And let's say that way, perhaps Polish government will change one day so that also in Paris, people are more open-hearted listening to what they say. But it is a better situation, I think, than 15 years ago to make lobby work for Ukraine, for Georgia, for Moldova even. I mean, it depends on how long the government will stay. Last point, because I don't want to be too long, is that, of course, there can be other things done. I mean, you don't, Robert said I should be not too technical and not too concrete in details. But I think it's a good strategy to try to engage for example, Germany, also European Commission, on specific topics where in general promises or strategic papers they would not confess to work together, but of course Germany is willing to work together also in topics like building up economy, or also like I think in security dimension. I mean, if you try to find areas where you can concretely cooperate and then show off that there is some cooperation which is also paying out, I think this can be a result of work which is interesting, even though nobody in Brussels is in the moment willing to agree in the Council on we would have a security cooperation on a broad line with Georgia. And yeah, I think especially Berlin is open-hearted, and you know that our government is having a lot of cooperation with your government, and you should try to use these ties. And German politicians have been here. Steinmeier has been here now. Merkel was there last year. They try to be honest and not promising too much, but what they promise is engagement. And I'm really sure that, I mean, they want to deliver. It's not easy sometimes on technical level, but the first step is to use this hand and use it as far as it's possible, and then perhaps see the next step. There is this one saying in this book, Momo, the guy who's cleaning up the streets, and then he's asked, how can you imagine the street is so long, how can you not give up? And he says, I concentrate on the next step. Yeah, and I think this is a bit situation.
Try this again. Yeah, it's working. Thank you very much. Oh, is it working? Is it working? Yeah. Okay, it's working. I like all the details, so I will ask later maybe for more concrete projects. But I want to ask you, because you mentioned the security dimension, I think this is the key discussion here in this country and in this region. Also from a Green perspective, I think that's a difficult topic. That's a difficult topic. How the security dimension can look like from your perspective. So what could you think about in terms of being realistic in the EU, knowing what this country needs? Maybe just one or two ideas, so how this could look like.
So first, in general, we see today that the US-American politics towards the region might feed into a split of NATO in the Eastern Partnership region. So the bilateral engagement with Poland or with Ukraine, I can really understand from Polish or Ukrainian perspective that they have to say yes to such engagement, and I also can understand the content of specific phone calls between leaders if you're in such a situation. But I think that there is an American strategy behind to make a kind of new bilateralization of the region, and if you look to the history of the region, this is not really successful, because in the end, for the conventional strategics in the region, you need a strong NATO and also Germany as a guarantee power of Article 5 in the NATO. So first is, I think nobody in the region has an interest in splitting the NATO, although I understand Polish and Ukrainian and Lithuanian approach that they need the engagement from US, and then they are glad that Trump is not pulling everything out. But it's a danger, because this is answered by a new gaullism from Paris, and if the NATO is not functioning anymore as a multilateral supranational framework, this will be really bad for the region. And this new development that the region seems to have to decide between Washington or Moscow, and not anymore for Brussels and perhaps also cooperation with Moscow, I think it's dangerous. Second is future of Pesco. I don't think that Pesco is a project which will feed into a big new, brand new, great military power European Union. But Pesco might help in creating some concrete new capacities and projects, and this is interesting. And perhaps Pesco is not doing the mistakes which common European or bilateral projects of military capacity did in the past. And I think you all should really look well into specific Pesco projects, look how they develop, and be prepared that in the second part, perhaps you ask for, might we have a share? Not in the development, but perhaps in the capacities which are done there. So that you look exactly at Pesco, and Pesco is not part of Eastern Partnership, but at some specific points it might be sensible to talk to the French and say, okay, if you are building anyway this and this new capacities, or could we perhaps have a cooperation on the education of forces in using this, or perhaps PESCO questions about strategic planning. Could we perhaps have some dialogue on how European Union is developing the further strategic planning in this and this branches? So trying to find niches or opportunities where you can log onto PESCO projects with a positive attitude as a shareholder in a sense, but understanding the structure that Pesco has decided to have one partner in the lead and only one second partner as a counterpart, because too many cooks usually make a bad kitchen, especially in military topics. And yeah, then of course there is a huge topic of countering like hybrid threats, internet and this stuff, and I think there's a huge willingness of a lot of partners in European Union on also learning from experiences in this region. Yeah, because I mean, I can come from Germany, I can say it openly, everything regarding internet is in Germany really, really weak. But I think there's also willingness for dialogue also on our side, and especially on the European Union level, when we look to not only Stratcom but also to others.
Final question to you in this round. You were talking about more funding for civil society in the beginning of your speech. As an organization like Boell Foundation, who is working first of all with civil society in this country and in the region, I don't think funding is the main problem. I don't think there is not enough money. If you look per capita, how much money Georgia gets in terms of civil society and foreign funding, it's quite huge. And you sometimes ask yourself, what is the outcome of all this funding? So the question for me would be more, and I think we have this experience also in Moldova, we have this experience in other countries, there's a big discussion about this going on. Do we not need a different kind of funding? Do we not need, and I also have this in the article, that I think you should really rethink the way how it works with civil society, what role civil society really have, and what kind of civil society you work. So do you really think it's a problem of more funding, or it's not a question of how it is funded and how it could maybe look like differently?
I wouldn't put these points against each other. I'm sure that, I mean, if you apply for money from the foreign ministry in Germany, it's always a problem per se, just because of paperwork. But when Eastern Partnership was established and this line in our budget was created for supporting civil society, it was actually clear that it's only for Eastern Partnership. Then we included Russia into it, and our coalition partners promised first to double, then to seriously increase the amount of money which is available, because the amount of persons who should be reached by including the Russian population has also been increased. And what we see today is that the money is shrinking again. In the next budget it will be 2 million less than in 2018. And I think it's an important signal to the region to say we want to fulfill the promise of the Grand Coalition in putting the financial capacities at the place which has been planned for that. And regarding senseless or not senseless, I have to confess that you are for sure right, but let's say it that way. Better to pay for senseless projects who are at least creating rooms for debates and supporting people who are on the right side in the region than to not have these persons anymore. And I know that earlier or later it's always a problem if you have money influx which is to a kind of foreign paid civil society. But on the other hand, I see countries where this was one important backbone for really positive developments in the past. And I think that we should really look on how we can increase the kind of projects who are creating more contact with local population at the places. and engage more like usual citizens, let it be in eastern Ukraine or on the countryside in Georgia in such projects, and not anymore only people like you, Stefan, and me. Georgian NGOs, of course, are something different, yeah, and think tankers. But I think that the signal we want to have more money for civil society cooperation. Germany is having a different personnel, also a staff orientation on that, and we want to have a new offensive regarding civil society cooperation between Germany and the Eastern Partnership. I think this is a politically important signal, even if in the end it will be not so efficient as we would perhaps hope it to be.
Thank you. Okay, Kornely. There's often this argument that if there would have been, or if there would be a membership perspective, reform process would go on much easier. You would have the carrot there. I'm always skeptical about this argument. Where do you see the main obstacles in Georgia itself? So in its also domestic policy, if we're thinking ahead of the elections we have and what's going on at the moment in the country, where do we see here the main obstacles also for more integration or for more for better performing in a reform process?
Thank you, Stefan. I think when we speak about the the process of the which I would call Europeanization of the region, including Georgia, it's some politicians, they like to call it like irreversible Europeanization, and we don't know. I hope this is true, but as you know, sometimes politicians say something which maybe academics question. But one thing is clear: this process already started. We know that it will take longer time. It's a long process, but one thing which is important is that these countries, and specifically Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, they need special attention from EU. And pretty much the same good model here should be like Baltic States, when they were actually kind of decoupled from the former Soviet Union after collapse of Soviet Union. And then we had a very good model when Baltic States actually competed with each other, who will do the better reforms. Sometimes it was Estonia who was the front runner, sometimes it was Lithuania. So I think we need some sort of creative new models which which can help these countries, and specifically including Georgia. As far as the Georgia's case, I think we have to be a little bit realistic also from Georgian point of view, because I understand all these reservations, and I also 10 days ago I was in Berlin. I also heard it from your foreign ministry officials that they don't like word carrot. They said we should not really use this carrot and what's next and something like that. In France, at the beginning of the year, it was even, they don't even want to hear the word perspective. So we understand that kind of the problem. But I want to give you a little bit Georgian perspective, what the ordinary citizens think. First of all, okay, as you know, the public opinion very heavily supports European integration and membership in NATO. But at the same time, I would not call it, I don't want to say it like there's some sort of democracy fatigue in the country, because the country already delivered some reforms. Of course, we are still not consolidated democracy. There's a lot of work should be done in terms of rule of law and promoting democracy and institutions and some other things. But the thing is that the public opinion also got a little bit, how does it, confused, because we are already in transitional period, already like 27 years. Transition, I imagine, can be like 5 years, 10 years, but 27 years, that's not a transition, that's a protracted transition or something else. I don't know what we can call it. And at the end of the day, what is the problematic here is that we need somehow manage the expectations. And of course, and everybody speaks about this, government, civil society. I think we have to understand this is not a job only of government. It's a job of academia, civil society, and everybody, basically, because we know that in short term or even medium term, I think we will not get whatever we may wish at this moment. But the thing is that and one of the question was today was asked that what can we do meantime? I mean, during this transition time between EU and Georgia or Eastern Partnership countries. That I think that I agree with Sophia here that Georgia has to continue with reforms, and we have a lot of things to do, and we have a lot of challenges, including the developing democratic structure, a lot of other stuff. But the thing is that we also need, and European perspective would help here, that especially for ordinary Georgians, because all this like implementation of the CFTA association agreement, it requires a lot of political price for political class. As well, it's also very painful for the population, and you need somehow to explain to the ordinary Georgians why while we're paying so much price, what we will get at the end. And if there is some sort of like light on the tunnel, means like, okay, if there will be perspective at some point, then this could a little bit help, the ordinary Georgians not to move towards this democracy fatigue, which we may have a little bit according to some public opinion polls. So I think that's also one of the problems. Another problem which I also wanted to mention is that what can be done meanwhile is that what we're lacking, and Stefan, you know that we had this project when we engaged with French and German think tanks last 3 years, and that was funded by think tank fund, which unfortunately this program already is closed. And now it was very great program because it was enabling, giving chances to Georgian think tanks to engage with their counterparts in European countries. So we had we had last 3 years some joint publication, joint events, and that was very crucial because what is missing here in Georgian. Yeah, so it means that we had a lot of good projects, and the pity thing is that this project just ends, and we don't know how to continue this project. And I will explain you why this is important, because what is lacking between Georgian and European societies is that we were part of the former Soviet space, so we don't have the societal contacts. It is just emerging now. We just started with Erasmus Mundus, and I'm teaching in university. I was also teaching in Jena and some other French universities, lots of 1,000 students. This is very good. But the thing is that it should be also we should a little bit more creative, because at the end of the day, one of the problems of the countries like Georgia is that, for instance, what ordinary, I don't know, French farmer knows about Georgia? Pretty much nothing. So and I don't think that except Georgians, somebody will do much there. So I think, of course, Georgian government and civil society and other actors should be active. But at the same time, we also need a little bit help to be the part of this European, how to say, debates about future of Europe. We understand because we consider ourselves, and we are part of the larger Europe, and that's acknowledged because we are a member of Council of Europe and some other European organization. So this is where which is kind of missing. And if we can do something about this, I think this could be, and there's many ways how to do it, but I'm not going to talk this. And second topic, which I also wanted to mention, is which is very important, the recent events which you already mentioned about what's going on in the West and transatlantic relations. This is problematic for countries like Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, which we call also frontline states, because the problem is that as you have a rift in the transatlantic relation, this translates not really positively in these countries. Especially, don't forget that we have a huge influence of Russian propaganda here. Sometimes this is neglected in EU capitals because they just think that, it doesn't matter, Georgians and Ukrainians, they are pro-European, and this will stay like this. This is not really correct, because things can change sometimes, and that's why we need a little bit more to support these countries. And one of the important things is, I understand that there is a reason why there is some rift and rise of populism, many internal problems in EU and also United States. But what is missing here is that strategic messaging from West, because when my generation actually started to work on Euro-Atlantic integration, there was one West. Now we are not sure if there is a one West or we have two West, or what we are talking about. And when I understand that there might not be so easy to solve all this problem right now between US and European states. I think what we need is, especially to this region, we need strategic messaging and to work together. And I know that some embassies, they're trying to do it in Georgia and Ukraine, but I think this should be kind of the part of the work which they do. And I'll maybe stop here and get a question. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much. Before I open also for you and for your questions here in the auditorium, I just have one question. There is this, at the moment, going on this discussion about the Baltic model. I think the Lithuanian foreign minister, he has brought this during the McCain conference very much in. And to be honest, I'm rather skeptical about this so-called Baltic model because of different reasons. This is a different time we are living. There are not these conflicts we have in the region where Russia is engaged. I don't see much regional cooperation. Especially in Georgia, I see huge disinterest also in the neighbors, or for instance in Armenia, which could be maybe a much closer partner, but more an interest to leave the region than being in the region. So what is this Baltic model which Georgia or the South Caucasus can adapt? I would agree, EU is always doing region building and things in terms of region, yeah? But the regions often do not think in this direction. So where do you see this Baltic model, and what can you learn from the Baltic states, really?
I think maybe we should start first very quickly just to define what is the region, because first of all we had this discussion in Germany 1 month ago, exactly what is the region. Is the Eastern Partnership region, or what is the South Caucasus? Is it a region, or it's a kind of sub-region of Eastern Partnership, or it's both of them actually part of the wider Black Sea region? So we can discuss it like hours, but we may not find a solution. But one thing is clear, is that what we need to find out, that if you look how European integration worked, I mean, in history, that it was, of course, there were cases when the individual states like Cyprus or in Malta or some others, they got membership, but mostly what happened that it was groupings. Like there was the Visegrad, there was the Baltic groupings, and some other things. Theoretically speaking, you may be right. Like the South Caucasus could be theoretically the one group, but the problem is that if you look what's happening in the region, this time, in the South Caucasus, of course, South Caucasus is, historically is one region. Economically it can be one region, but unfortunately, politically speaking, it looks now more like failed region. Especially after Georgia signed the association agreement, Georgia is now, and it's not right now, but even before that, started drifting towards more like towards Ukraine and Moldova, because these three associated countries now they have common interest, and pretty much. They can work in case if they find some ways how to institutionalize these links. And one of the good models here is the Baltic States. Everybody in Georgia thinks that that when Baltic started the cooperation, it was easy for them because they were cousins of each other and they never had a problem between each other, which is not true. Of course, there were some discrepancies. They also had some grievances about each other, but they were much. They had a strategic thinking. They knew what they wanted. Of course, I agree with you, Stefan, that there was different timing. Russia was weaker, everything. But the thing is, what we have now that. What I see from Georgian perspective, the Georgians, as you know, we are not really well known for patience, and because of that, Georgians cannot really wait what will happen with the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and when our neighbors will solve this problem. And basically that puts Georgia a little bit in position that Georgia wants kind of, as you mentioned, kind of escape from the region, which, geographically it's not possible. If that was possible, we would do it like 3 centuries before. But at the same time, Georgia wants to be attached itself somehow to the countries with whom they have like political same interests. That's why there was a very good initiative when there was a initiative when they created this interparliamentary working group with the 3 countries. It may not be enough right now, but I think that also European Union needs a little bit to look to the region a little bit differently and not to take these old dogmas. And when I understand that when Soviet Union collapsed, they considered South Caucasus like one region. But there's some realities now. There's some different interests. Armenia is a member of CSTO, member of Eurasian Union. They have a little bit different interests. There's some changes recently, but we don't know where it will lead. In Azerbaijan, we have also different situation. It's somewhere between, neutrality or, they are member of this non-alignment movement. And Georgia is very pro-Western. So I don't think that in short or medium term, these countries can manage to find this consensus about the foreign policy. So that means that we should not really waste time on this, and let's work on the countries who are ready to deliver something. And Of course, I understand this is not popular in Brussels and some European capitals to speak about differentiation, but of the region, and they don't want to split this region. And one of the reasons, as you already mentioned, is that lack of the vision, because they don't know what to do with this region. But the problem is not only from Brussels or from the European Union. This is also from the region, the regional political elite. Sometimes there is also missing the vision from our side. For instance, what to do, and that's why now the actually European Union started this basically question. I mean, what to do after 2020, because nobody really knows what to do. And of course, I hope that they will not invent something like map for like European Union and or some other artificial things. And we need to find some ways to accommodate the interest of these countries, and especially for three countries who I would call the associated countries. And of course, it doesn't mean that we should not cooperate with other countries. And I think in that terms, that there's many ways where European Union can cooperate with these partner countries. And of course, I understand there's several capitals, like in France, they have more interest toward Mediterranean Union, and they don't consider European Union, the Eastern Partnership, as a something like a privileged partnership. But of course, we understand. But we spoke about the pessimistic and optimistic scenarios, and I'm very optimistic because. Last year, I think it was last year or this year, when Angela Merkel visited my university, she was pushed by students. They were asking her, okay, what she thinks about Georgia's EU membership and some other. Of course, she first declined foreign policy, official German foreign policy, but she said something which we can take as a kind of like optimistic note. That she said that, that actually after the Balkan enlargement, if this happens and we don't know when, we're kind of thinking about Ukraine and Georgia. So, of course, again, I'm saying this is not the official position of Germany, and she said this because she was pressured, but I think that's already kind of a good sign. Of course, it doesn't mean that we should be now...
Send your students also to Berlin and Paris.
I agree, but I think that in long term, we need to think, because these neighbors will not disappear. We will be neighbor here, and it's very important for us and for the European Union to find some new formulas to cooperation.
Okay, I want to bring you in, and you can later, if we have a round, you can also react to each other later, but I think it's also time to bring you in if we have here a talk. We have microphone. I don't know if this is really working. Maybe you try.